Welcome back, artists, and if it's your first time here, I'm Wyatt Paints. And this week, we're getting a little gritty in the studio because I wanted to run an experiment using sand as a medium. And there's no more perfect subject for this experiment than the often forgotten Spider-Man villain, Sandman. This model comes to me from this week's sponsor, 3DX Files, once again showing love to the often forgotten characters in the comicscape. And since he doesn't get the love he deserves, I'm going to be dropping some deep dive Sandman lore all throughout the video. So while Anakin may hate it, we're getting sandy in the studio. But this is going to take some extra prep work, so meet me over at the spray booth. I'll grab my brushes so we can get started. Starting with the model fresh out of my cure box, I mounted the head and arm to paint sticks, which are just super cheap chopsticks I picked up from my local Asian market. $8 for 100 sets. What a steal. Everything just needs a quick black prime to prep the surface, and I'm doing myself a favor by leaving the base props in place for this. They're going to mark out their footprint for me to mask out later. After a few minutes, I could pop off the props and have clear lines where I need to put down a mask for the next step. You can use a lot of different things to mask a project like silly putty, liquid mask, and whatnot. For simple jobs like this, I tend to turn to good old painter's tape. Now, for the reason for all this precaution and prep is that I intend to use sand to add to the already sculpted texture. While 3DX Files did a great job, nothing looks like sand quite like, well, sand. While a person could sculpt this level of granular detail, it would be a giant pain to print, and the surface geometry would make the file sizes huge. So, sand to the rescue. But that does mean I have to protect the keys for the extra parts, otherwise they won't fit cleanly. Also, covering up anything that won't be sand, like the asphalt, is a good idea. Now for the actual sanding experiment, I'm going to be trying out adhesive spray. I figure this might be the best way to lay down a very thin but tacky surface for the sand to grab onto. So after a good spray down, I gritted them up with sand. And the particular sand I'm using is meant for reptile aquariums, so it's very fine and pretty low dust, so that's nice. While I grit up these pieces, it's time for the first bit of Sandman lore. Now Sandman isn't a guy that turns into sand. He's always sand, including his clothes. He uses green and brown sand grains to form what appears to be his shirts and pants. This is why he never changes clothes. After giving this spray glue at least an hour to dry, it was looking pretty good. But looks can be deceiving, as the sand is barely holding on. Plus, the surface has a very sticky feel, and trying to press down more sand didn't seem to help. So, to lock it all down, I mixed up some Elmer's glue with water at about 1:1. It should look somewhere between milk and cream. Now, because I'm dealing with glue and sand, I'm using a cheap brush just in case I ruin it. While there is the possibility to clean it right after, it's better to assume that it'll die and only use a brush that you're willing to lose. Now, the idea here is to really saturate the sand, so this needs to be dabbed in place rather than brushed. Besides, the sand is just too delicate at this point. And speaking of sand, it's time for another lore drop. Sandman doesn't really describe him fully, as he can control any rock, sand, or earth he's in immediate contact with. The upper limit of this is constrained only by his level of concentration. He can even fly by becoming a sandstorm and floating off to wherever he wants to go. Now that all the sand has been locked down, time for some satisfying mask peels. And while I do that, I have time for another quick lore nugget. Being made of sand has the side effect of making him no longer needing to eat, sleep, or even breathe, theoretically making him immortal. Knowing this, it definitely elevates his villain tier. And good news, looks like the masks were successful. For now, I'm going to put them aside so I can take care of these props. First up, a bit of tire work. This will be fast and easy, starting with a medium dry brush of gunmetal for the wheel. If you control your paint load here, you won't need to do any shading as the black primer serves perfectly well as the deepest shadow. If you do end up having a bit of a heavy hand here, you might need to work a bit of dark tone to shade it up again. Thankfully, this one's looking pretty good, so I skipped it and jumped straight to a highlight. And that highlight will come from Mithril. Here, it's even more important to check and double check your paint load. Ideally, you want the paint barely coming off the brush to just edge it up. While I still had the metallics out, it just made sense to repeat this on the pipe part that's sticking out on the backside. Just dial it in so none of the sand gets disturbed, and it should be no problem. Now for the rubber, I want to keep it simple, so I based it with a mix of matte black and a touch of deep gray. This does double duty as it's also cleaning up any of the overspill from the chroming of the wheel. Just be sure to get full coverage. You wouldn't want any shiny bits on the sidewalls. To close out the tire, a light dry brush of just deep gray along the treads. Keeping this as a pretty light load should ensure that it only gets picked up by the hard edges of the tread, giving me a nice, clean looking tire. For this hydrant, I'm going with a classic red with resplendent red. While not all hydrants are actually red, I feel it's just a bit more instantly recognizable in red. Plus, with it surrounded by so much brown and tan, this red should help it stand out. It also doesn't hurt to leave a bit of the black prime showing in the deeper areas. Then, for a subtle highlight, pure red in a super light dry brush to pick up on the details. When it comes to the asphalt, I'm going to build up from the black primer, going with a medium dry brush of deep gray over the entire surface. This needs to be light enough so that the surface dimples get skipped over, leaving a moderately mottled surface. If you do overdo it, you can always reset it to black. So feel free to be bold here. The safety net is pretty foolproof. Then it was time for a final highlight of ash gray with a light dry brush focused on the exposed edges. This will quickly wrap up this final detail. After assembly, there were a few spots in the connections where the black primer was still visible through the stand, so I took care of it with a touch of thinned down glue and sand to patch it up. While this is a cleanup step, it was pretty fortunate that it happened, as it gave me a chance to add a bit more sand around the props so that they look like they're coming out of the sand rather than sitting on top of it. After which, I set it down to dry, and about an hour later, I called this one done. And wow, Sandman came out great. While I wasn't completely thrilled with the results of testing the adhesive spray, this came together as a fun project for my shelf. Working with sand this fine can always be difficult, but I really like the natural result. If you wanted a more comic book look, you could totally add some more washing and actually paint the sand, but for my project, I'm sticking with au naturel. I do want to point out that this model also comes with a small scale Spider-Man that attaches to the hand, but I felt Sandman never gets a solo statue, so today is going to be his spotlight. Thank you to all my subscribers over on Patreon. Your support helps make these videos possible. And I want to give a special shout out to this week's sponsor, 3DX Files. It's been a minute since I painted one of their sculpts, and they did not disappoint. It definitely makes my day to see what many would call a C-list villain given the spotlight. Sort of like Dr. Light in Identity Crisis, but better. Sculpts don't get much better than this. 3DX Files really did come through. It's quite dynamic with a focus on the action of the scene. Really top marks. If you'd like to get your hands on this sculpt, be sure to use the top link in the description and head over to 3DX Files Patreon. You might just find your next project. Lastly, as a final Sandman lore dump, I mentioned before that he's always sand, but not exactly, as his mind inhabits a single grain of sand from the astral plane. He keeps that grain hidden somewhere in his mass. If you were able to separate that single grain from the rest, you would put him in a sort of lucid coma, kinda dark. But like sands through an hourglass, these are the days of our lives, and I don't want any more to pass before I get started on the next project. So until next time, thank you for watching, stay creative, and always enjoy the process.